So, Stefano, tell me a little bit about this movie of yours. I'm so excited to hear about it.
Yeah, so for me, I would say in my generation, the most consequential thing that happened was 9/11. I think it was a watershed moment for people my age and our generation, terrorism, the geopolitical aspects of it, and also feeling like you were kind of growing up into an adult, that the world was not as safe as you thought when you were a kid and sort of being protected. And I think that this documentary, The Day I Had to Grow Up, was a call to trying to understand this generation's obsession with youth activism and sort of how youth activism has sort of evolved from my generation, the millennials, to sort of the Gen Zers, and kind of having a sympathetic approach, a very sympathetic approach to them, but also trying to see how aspects of social media have really affected the perspective of how they want to engage in activism and social issues altogether. So, you know, we're excited for the film. It's going to be at the Kennedy Center April 2nd, which is a big honor in Washington, D.C. And, you know, I'm love spending time with youth. I love listening to them and their perspective. And so we cover kids, 6 kids. One focuses primarily on sunrise movement, so climate change issues. A girl who focuses on high student debt crisis. Another one who's a survivor from the Parkland school shooting. And someone else who is very pro Black Lives Matter. And so we try to have an array of each different sort of issues that are topical going on in each individual, and finding out about those kids and how they grew up, what kind of families they came from. So we try to make it as personal as possible.
That is incredible. Now, if you don't mind me asking, how old were you when 9/11 happened?
I was 21. I think I was, so I'm 30. I was not, yeah, so I was 21 years old. Yeah, 2001. Yeah, so 38, 39. Exactly. I was 21 years old when it happened.
Yeah, I was 17 myself. It was just such a surreal, it's unforgettable. It's one of those things you'll never forget. And I don't even have words for it. So, and what was the most interesting thing you learned from one of these kids that you spoke to?
I think that I came into the documentary being very, I don't want to use the word suspect or critical, but I think as a function of age, sometimes you can think that the kids are a bit naive. And so part of standing back and listening to them, not editorializing the film, not editorializing the way that I saw or see the world from a political and social way, I think I realized that they had a much better grasp of reality than I initially gave them credit. That's the first thing that I would genuinely say that sort of knocked me back a little bit. That's the first thing. Second thing is that the influence of social media. There's so much pressure to say the things that you can't be so outspoken insofar as being outcasted from your group of friends. So you have a very loud microphone, but it's not as though you can have a lot of diversity of thought, because if you stray from the group, especially at a young age, actually any age, you then don't belong. And I think that one of the things that I look for, and we look for in the composition, is for kids who had some, most of them are obviously very progressive, very democratic, but I looked for some kids that had some aspect to being more centrist and Republican without it ever being directly present in the documentary, because I'm so interested in kids who have come to certain realizations on their own. So that they were wiser than I thought, that they were resilient, and that social media is an immeasurable effect that they have lived with, but they don't have a bird's eye view of, because it's just always been a part of their existence.
Yeah. Isn't it amazing how these kids never lived out social media? Because I remember when it first came out, like I think it was like a senior in college or something, and now people don't even know what it's like to be without it.
Yeah. Oh my God. It's a crazy thing to think that we used to have that dial-up internet and be like, Mom, get off the phone, and you'd lose your dial-up, you'd lose the whatever page that you were surfing on. I think it's they can't they I mean it's like us thinking about like without having running water, or like it's like us thinking about like, it used to take 3 hours to prepare dinner because you'd have to get fire for a stove and indoor plumbing, right? Where like a very like indoor plumbing is relatively very recent to the existence of human existence on Earth, and so it's very hard to for them to put it in perspective. Um, but I'm always curious about their emotional state, about how it affects them emotionally. Does it make them more open? Does it make them less open? Are they more reluctant? Also, can they see in the documentary we cover sort of, can they see the disadvantages for it? Can they see the disadvantages of social media as well? Some of them can, for sure. They see it more in an emotional way rather than the intellectual way of sort of seeing that, advertisers they basically moderate your views to things that they already know that you're going to like. So they group us into, if I think that, if I'm very pro Joe Biden and I'm, the climate crisis is a terrible thing that's going on, it will feed me ads, feed me groups, feed me things that I already. So the question becomes, the deeper question, I think, is how do you get conversation going, right? How do you get real dialogue and discourse in social media? I don't know if we really have solved that issue as a society, but it's a question I ask a lot, and I spend a lot of time on it in the doc.
Incredible. And what is one thing you hope people take away from watching the documentary? What do you hope they like about it?
I think that the first thing is that they realize that these kids are more thoughtful than they may originally think. It's always a sense of looking at Generation Z and saying they're extremely idealistic, they don't have a sense of what's going on, and they're pushing for policies. They tend to push for policies that are extremely progressive, right? But there's a large scope of wisdom, not just knowledge, but some wisdom with these kids. That's the first thing that I hope people take away. So a sense of hope, a real sense of hope. A sense also that youth have a real purpose. They come at the intersection between criticality and hope, right? They can see the world's pain, but they also see the world's possibility. And whether as an adult now in my late 30s, I agree with it or I don't, it's very important to take into that perspective, because it reorients some of the things that you lose as you grow up. You become more practical, you become less idealistic, you are dealing with money and mortgages and all sorts of different things of your own sort of family raising life. That's the second thing. The third thing that I would say is that we should be sympathetic to kids, that they're going to grow up whether we want to, whether we like it or not, whether we agree with this generation's perspective or not. And so shepherding them, not talking down to them, being mentors of being involved in their life and being involved with youth groups that have specific social aims is to our benefit. It's to the entire United States benefit. It's to everybody's benefit, because not engaging them on a political level they'll develop their own ideas anyway. And so the film is very much a political film in that sense, and really sort of looking at the trajectory of youth activism in America, where it's going, what its sort of underlying elements are. So I want people to have those three things: the hope, the aspect of engaging them, that they're brighter than we think, and that also that they have a very important purpose in a political sense of giving us, always a perspective that we don't have.
And are you considering making this into a series? Because it sounds like you could talk to more generations as this new generation grows up, people from our generation. It seems like you can make this into a whole big series.
Yeah, we've talked to NBC about it, and it's something that we're still in dialogue about. Whether we've talked about the series and also as a podcast and having young people involved and sort of getting a breakdown from their history, their background, what political orientation their parents were. I'm so curious about that. I love finding out about people's families. I love finding out about what their parents said when they were around dinner, whether they talked about politics, and then sort of how they become different political people. So yes, to the podcasting, yes to NBC. And just because the last documentary, the one previous to this that we did, was featured on Meet the Press, and it was part of AFI's Meet the Press documentary series. Before Peacock.com existed, it would stream on NBC.com before Peacock became really their internet station. So yes, absolutely, yeah, absolutely, would love to turn it into a series.
I like that. I like the idea of a podcast too. I think that's going to make it really fun.
Yeah, I think so as well. And hearing what they care about, what they think about, meeting a new person. Every episode's a new kid, or a new youth, and that's a nice spotlight on the individual. And yeah, I think also it's topical. It's always topical, change. Youth activism in general, what's going on now with Ukraine and Russia. Think of the generation of the kids that are growing up as young Ukrainians who are now going to Poland, going to Hungary, whose fathers probably had to stay behind to fight as civilians and join the military, which they weren't initially ascribed to being part of. I love stories like this. I love finding out about these kids because I love finding out how it turns them into what kind of political creatures, what kind of political human beings do they become. I find that so fascinating how kids who have very Republican parents can become very democratic, and I find it even more fascinating kids that have hippie parents, super hippie parents, and are very sort of democratic or very progressive. Maybe you have parents parents grow marijuana, whatever, and they grew up in the 60s, and then they work for a hedge fund or they work for Goldman Sachs, and I think that it just shows me that we really need each other very, 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 very much, because each individual on a general level, there are traits to Republicans and Democrats that are extremely beneficial and different and serve the world in a cooperative way.
True, it's true. And what would also be interesting is if you do a celebrity version of it, like maybe with celebrity youth or celebrities, to hear how they grew up and how they're political, because a lot of them are very politically active. Yeah. Like, George Clooney was always very politically active, and several others have very big beliefs. So I think that would be an interesting thing to do too, to add maybe a special edition podcast episode.
Yeah, that's a great idea. That's a great idea. And I think the ones that obviously you mentioned George Clooney, people in that crew, Matt Damon, obviously their causes for water around the world and water sustainability. George Clooney's wife, now that he married, is a very political person, and Republicans too. I mean, I find it fascinating how Clint Eastwood has been able to shoot at Warner Brothers, and sort of the only one who, I think there's a lot of Republicans in Hollywood who just are very in the closet. It's not a very fun place to be. I think all of that, I mean, those guys, the celebrities and how they came about is great. And what I always try to look at when I look at celebrities and someone I really admire the most, who I would consider a Democrat, but a very centrist Democrat, which would be sort of, full disclosure, my perspective, which would be someone like Bill Maher, who is extremely critical of sort of the far left of his party, still votes Democratic, but he's not, he's not afraid to call out both parties on their, let's just say, their shortcomings.
Yes.
And, yeah. So I think all these people are fascinating, and how they grew up, and just very interesting background. So I will take that note for the celebrities.
Nice. Yes. And thank you. Enjoy it. And one thing I like asking people I interview is, tell me a fun fact about yourself.
Well, I think that the most interesting fact about being drawn into these stories, these American political stories, is that I only became an American in 2015. I was not born in this country.
Oh, really?
No, I was not born in this country. And so for me, having an Italian passport, my parents were born in Italy, and then growing up in very cold winters in Canada, I had a very diverse political background. I spoke 3 languages. I was around when the French were trying to separate from Canada, and the French separatist movement that was very palpable when I was a kid. And so I was very sympathetic to these ideas, because it's where I lived. And having Italian parents as immigrants who had a very perspective of appreciation for the motherland that they come to, and myself, becoming an American was a very big deal. And I remember crying at my ceremony, and I checked out America. I visited basically 40 of the 50 states, and I did a lot of like road trips cross country twice. And I really wanted to know what I was getting involved in before I signed up for this long marriage. And I love America. And I think part of the political work that I do is a patriotic work. It's appreciation for the US, no matter how seemingly screwed up sometimes things can be. I love being an American, and I think it's a great thing.
And since that's a beautiful story, by the way. Have you visited all 50 states yet, or just the 40 so far?
Yeah, so there's some, obviously, I haven't crossed into. I haven't done the Dakotas. I haven't done South and North Dakota. I haven't done Oklahoma. I haven't done, I've done Oregon. I'm just trying to think of some of the ones that I sort of haven't done towards, like I haven't done Mississippi. I've never been to Mississippi and Alabama, but most of them that you would hit right across the country, the New Mexicos, the Nebraskas, the Iowas, obviously I'm in Colorado now. I was in Texas 6 days ago, just filming a movie in Austin. This is a great country. It's a very fascinating, pluralistic country. There's a lot of diversity, and there's not one size fits all American, and there's not one size fits all Democrat, and there's not one fits all Republican. So I love that about this country. I think it's extremely varied, and that's a big advantage to us. Yeah.
I like that. And what's your next project going to be? Are you allowed to talk about that yet?
Yeah, so I'm working on a New York City 1980s graffiti documentary about Jean-Michel Basquiat's work, the most famous Black modern artist's work, his graffiti work with Albert Diaz. They invented a graffiti tag that became world renowned. That's called SAMO, the SAMO graffiti tag. And my whole documentary is a feature on the origins of SAMO. And then Al Diaz's work as he sort of resurrected the SAMO tag in 2016. And that's what I was doing in Austin. I was at an art gallery at West Chelsea Contemporary Gallery in Austin, Texas, filming filming art. That's how I sort of can zen out of my political sort of films. I can sort of be like, oh, okay, let's go on. Let's do something. Let's just do something a little bit more like less divisive, go to cocktail parties and just talk about modern art.
That's awesome. Great. And where can we follow you on social media so we can continue to see all your progress? And of course, I want to have you on when your next movie comes out.
Would love that. I would love that. So my handle is at Stefano, Stefano, DAFRE, at Stefano DeFray. And the production company that myself and Laura Pellegrini, the co-director, founded is Rosso Films International with 2 S's, means red in Spanish, rossofilmsinternational.com.
Beautiful. Well, thank you for taking the time today. I appreciate you and good luck with everything. I'm proud of you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me. And I can't wait to be with you on the next graffiti documentary.
Yes, just let me know when.
I will. I will.
Thank you. Bye.